Welcome, everyone, to the Q&A session for our upcoming course, Evolving Beyond Your Wounds, the 20-week journey to free yourself to manifest your purpose. I'm Lisa Bonnice, and it's my honor to be hosting this Q&A conversation for the Shift Network, where we'll explore the teachings of Tim Kelley and Beth Scanzani and address questions about their upcoming 20-week course, Evolving Beyond Your Wounds, which begins Thursday, November 1st. Later, I'll explain how you can participate in this course, even if you can't attend the live sessions. But first, I want to introduce Tim and Beth. Tim Kelley is a global change agent and internationally renowned expert on higher purpose. He works with top leaders in many fields and countries to transform human institutions and evolve society to its new form. Tim's methodology, True Purpose, has been featured internationally in magazines, newspapers, and on television. Beth Scanzani is a highly respected and multifaceted life coach and teacher. Her studies encompass a purposeful blend of psychological, scientific, and spiritual perspectives. She's attained numerous coaching certifications, and she's a trained practitioner and teacher for voice dialogue. And in just a few minutes, we're going to open up for your questions. But first, I want to welcome Beth and Tim, who are going to start out our call by leading us in a mini teaching. Welcome, Tim Kelley and Beth Scanzani.
Thanks, Lisa.
Hi. Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Hi, everybody. All right, Tim, are you thinking about leading? Do you want me to lead, or how would you like to play?
I'm not sure if you guys can hear me yet. How's my audio doing? Are we
Your
all
audio's
connected?
good. Yes.
Okay, good. Cool.
We are
so
all connected.
I think you should drive, and I'll comment from the sidelines.
Okay. All right. Sounds great. Yeah. So, virtually all humans have some version of what you might call a childhood wounding. We all come into the world in our beautiful essence, if you will. And then at some point, usually before the age of 7, but it can also be later, something happens. Something happens that's overwhelming and intolerable to the child's psyche, to your psyche, and you feel unsafe or embarrassed or shamed or frightened, maybe abandoned, maybe abused, something that is overwhelming and intolerable. And this could be a traumatic event, or it could be a pattern of events that happens in your life. And a wounded child is formed. Okay, so in our psyche, in your psyche, a wounded child is formed. And this wounded child, we'll call it a part, this wounded child part takes on the unpleasant, the intolerable emotions that we were feeling that we couldn't handle at that time, and puts them down into the unconscious. So do we have a way of having people raise a hand, Lisa, or something, if they have encountered a wounded child part?
I don't believe we do.
All right. Yeah, so if you have encountered a wounded child part in yourself, just think about what that is. Imagine what that is for the moment. And you can have more than one. So this wounded child part is born, if you will. And then, ta-da, this rapid response team comes. And the psyche is an amazing thing. This rapid response team comes, it's on the job. Its job is safety. Number one is safety. And your brilliant psyche creates this masterful protection plan and hires a really devoted and qualified staff to make sure that you're safe and to make sure that you don't have to experience these intolerable emotions again, to protect you from feeling this wounding experience again. So you've got a team of experts now, and they're really good at what they do, and they're perfectly trained. And they help you be and do whatever it is that you need to be and do in their minds that will keep you safe, according to their job description. So, for example, maybe when you were a child, something happened and you just felt incredibly stupid. or you were ridiculed and felt stupid, and this emotion was intolerable. So the job description of some of the parts in your psyche, might be to make sure that you're always smart, make sure that you always read everything, that you always know everything, that you can never, ever feel stupid again. Or maybe you felt like you were a bother because you needed things as a child, and maybe your parents didn't have time for you. So you become incredibly self-sufficient. You don't have to need anything or bother anybody for anything. Or maybe you're super funny because you want people to love you and include you. So these parts of our personality, our persona, are formed, as a result of the wounding. And along with it, you get a wonderful staff of parts that are devoted, dedicated. They each have a mission, they have a purpose, they have a job description, they have very clear goals, they know what they're supposed to do, they're perfectly qualified and trained to do it. They are absolutely devoted, they're tireless, they work 24/7. If you tried to get them to stop, that might be kind of hard to do. There are ways, we're going to talk about that in the program, but it's not so easy, because they are devoted. Tim, do you want to chime in and say anything here before I go on?
Yeah, just to frame this a little bit. So the idea is, what Beth is doing here is drawing the connection between the core wound, which we know many of you are interested in and probably have already done some exploration of your core wounds, and are interested in transforming those wounds and moving beyond them. What she's talking about is the way the wound actually sets up a process of forming parts, different little subpersonalities in your psyche. You may or may not have done parts work before, right? If you have, you may have done voice dialogue or NLP or Gestalt or internal family systems therapy or constellations. There's all sorts of different systems that explore parts. There are lots of books about parts too. The idea is that there's these little voices in your head, right? The one that says, oh, you're fat and ugly, stupid, and no one loves you. Another one says, you're a spiritual being trapped in a physical body. And another one says, you need more money, these kind of things. So you've got these voices inside your head telling you different stuff. Some of them are conscious, some of them are unconscious. And what Beth's doing is showing how the wound process itself creates all of these parts. So this team of experts, this staff operating inside your head, are the parts that were originally created because of your wound. And that's important because it actually guides how they operate and how they function. And you may well have encountered and worked with some of these parts in the past. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But you probably, maybe you did, you probably can't see the direct connection between each of the various main parts of your personality and your wound. Like there's a plan here, there's a system, there's a strategy. And these parts were all created and hired as part of a larger strategy. And it's a little hard to see because initially the wound is unconscious and the strategy is unconscious. If you've done enough work on yourself, enough workshops, enough therapy, eventually you start to be able to peel back the covers and see some of what's going on and see this team of experts that Beth is talking about at work doing their job. And most people's reaction is like, ugh, yuck, oh my God, why is this part criticizing me? Why is this part telling me I should never take risks? Why is this part doubting my capabilities? What's all this negative self-talk about? Well, it's all part of a larger strategy. And it's hard to kind of piecemeal go in and try to get one of these parts to behave differently, as Beth is saying. It's very, very difficult to do because you don't know the overall strategy. You don't know why these parts are doing what they're doing. They all have a reason for it. And you don't know the overall strategy that caused this particular mix of parts to be hired and tasked with doing what they're doing.
Yeah, that's great context. Thanks, Tim. And so it turns out that these parts develop incredible strengths and capacity and really help you navigate your life. Without these parts, you might not have been as safe. You might not have felt as loved. You might not have been able to navigate things. They really are devoted to your well-being. And at some point, their strategies become limiting. All this energy and devotion to keeping you safe can be really limiting when you want to go out and express your purpose, or you want to show up in relationship in a different way. It takes a lot of energy to keep all these parts, paying attention and acting and reacting. And like I said, they're on board 24/7, right? So you may be very unconscious of them at some point, and then as time goes on, you start to become more conscious that some of these patterns are really limiting. I am super self-sufficient, and I am totally out of touch with my needs. That's in my unconscious, along with my wounded child, right? So it really can limit your impact. And the good news is that you can actually shift these wound-based limiting patterns. You can even shift the job descriptions of the parts such that what's been holding you back, the parts that have been holding you back, can actually become a team of allies, can become your support team. And that's one of the really cool things about this Evolving Beyond Your Wound programs, is that you not only get lots of understanding and information and appreciation about the wound, as Tim was saying, and why it is the way, why your subpersonality and parts are the way that they are, but you can also shift your relationship and shift their relationship to you, with you, and to what you're trying to do in life. So as you evolve your wound, you actually open the path for things that are really important to you and for you that you haven't been able to do in the past. And that frees you to create the changes that you're here to create. If you're a change agent, if you really want to fulfill your purpose in life, the motivation of the parts, the wounded parts, before they're transformed, is a bigger priority. And we'll talk about that in the course. It'll take your energy more so than fulfilling your purpose. So we wanted to give that context before we went into Q&A, a little bit of context and information about parts and how they are associated with wounding and how they end up showing in your life and in your personality. Anything else, Tim?
Yeah, just as Beth's saying, so there's the overall system for transforming wounds that we've developed with Jeffrey Van Dyke, who will also be joining us as part of the course. Involves transforming parts, because there are parts that were created as part of the wound, transforming beliefs that were created as part of the wound, transforming your relationship to the emotions that came out of the wound. So there's all these different kinds, there are others, but those are three of the main ones who are actually helping you to understand and make conscious these different elements of the wound, and then transform each one in a particular sequence, the result of which is the wound no longer seems like a wound, and it's no longer in the way. And the parts that were holding you back are now helping you manifest your purpose. And it's a completely different orientation to yourself and to life. That's what I would add, Beth.
And I can say for sure that my wounding is around not being heard, not being seen, and whatever I say doesn't matter. And I absolutely would not be here today if it had not been working on shifting my relationship to my wounds.
Cool. Shall we shift to Q&A here, Beth? It seems like we've done justice. If people have questions about it, you can ask questions about that. You can ask questions about the course. You can ask questions about anything having to do with transforming your wounds. We're available for all of it.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, that's a great way to start out. Thank you both, Beth and Tim. For our viewers, we have the rest of our time together to dive into your questions for Tim and Beth as we prepare for their upcoming course. Again, it's called Evolving Beyond Your Wounds, and it begins Thursday, November 1st. If you want to check out the website and learn more about the 20-week course, you can visit beyondyourwounds.com to see the full description. So let's go ahead and get started with some Q&A. If you have a question for Tim and Beth, go ahead and type them in, and I'll be happy to read them aloud. And we have plenty of questions already piled up here, so let's get started. We've got an anonymous question here that says, would you please describe some of the techniques you'll be using to help people uncover their subconscious wounding events?
Yeah. Yeah, so we have a whole process of looking at the wound and identifying, as Tim was saying, there's many layers of this, identifying, so what were the emotions? When that happened, what were the feelings? What were the emotions? And and what were the beliefs that were created in that moment? I'm not worthy, or it's not safe for me to speak, right? What were those core wound-based beliefs that were created? And what decisions were made? Okay, I have to be really good at being invisible, right? I have to be really smart. I have to be really self-sufficient. Whatever decisions were made, what do I need to do to keep myself safe and make sure that I can never feel this way again, and prove at the same time that this belief is not true? So what are these strategies? And then the parts are created. So we explore all of that. And with the beliefs, we also, Lion Goodman joins us around, we identify not only the belief, but he takes us through a belief transformation process. He's got a process called Clear Your Beliefs that he uses, and he's going to come in and do a class to help us clear beliefs. We work with the parts. We work on transforming the parts. Okay, seeing if the parts might be ready for a different job description based on what you've learned about them and they've learned about you. So many layers. Tim, what would you add to that?
Yeah, so that's the process for transforming the wound in terms of uncovering the details of the wound. For most people, the much of it can be determined from a simple just list of questions, right? We're actually looking for certain key experiences in people's history. And so usually there are clear markers to what those key experiences were. First of all, the memories stand out strongly, that's one. And another is that if most people, by the time they've reached the age where they're doing a course like this one, have some clue of what the patterns are that they've been wrestling with in therapy or coaching or whatever, and they've been struggling, trying to be less like this, whatever that is. And that too is a clue to what the original event was. Oh, when was the moment when you decided that being like that was a good idea? Now that will work for the majority of people. It won't work for everybody. So for some people, the wound itself is unconscious. That is the event that gave rise to all of this stuff. The memory of it also got suppressed into the unconscious, right? So you hear about people who have trauma who don't discover until they're in their 30s or 40s that they were sexually abused when they were a child. Well, they were there when it happened. What happened? Well, what happened was the memory got shoved down along with the feelings. So it's not true for everybody that the experience itself is conscious. So the parts work is a great way of dealing with that, because if you actually talk to the wounded child part, which itself is usually unconscious, but it's generally there and generally accessible. There's some ways that we'll teach you of how to create permission to talk to the wounded child part. But once you've got communication set up with the wounded child part, you can just ask it and say, hey, what was the wound that created you? And it can talk about it in painstaking detail. It'll tell you exactly what happened and who was there and all that, because it's living with that memory every day, even though it's unconscious for you. So that's a surefire method of being able to identify the original wounding experience. And as Beth was saying, the wounded child part can help answer some of those other questions. Here are the emotions, here are the beliefs that got created, those sorts of things. The wounded child can help you flesh out the details of the wound so that we know what wound it is that we're transforming.
Yeah, and there's a bit of, you can also do some, I think as Tim started to say, some reverse engineering by looking at what are the patterns that keep showing up that are self-limiting, and do some reverse engineering on that too. So,
most people, it's only
great.
With a few people who need to do who need to rely exclusively on the wounded child because the whole thing was unconscious. That's rare, but it happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, great. We've got a lot of questions here. So Nan is asking, so you evolved through awareness of your wounds?
That's part of it. Awareness is part of it. There's awareness. There's also an appreciation. So really an appreciation for the beauty and perfection of the way the psyche created these parts right? The staff of parts helped me to create a persona that I brought out into the world, where I showed up in a way that protected me from feeling the wounded feeling, whether it was shame or embarrassment or abandonment, so that I could navigate my life, so that I could move through life, helped me gain skills. My invisibility, as an example, helped me gain skills as I was very quiet and I watched everything and I watched everybody, and I didn't have the distraction of having to do or say anything. And I learned a lot. And I also learned a lot about myself. I spent a lot of time with myself. What are the gifts? What are the gifts, capacities, and strategies, and appreciation for that? And then, if it's right and if you're ready, there's a transformation process that you can go through, where you do make some of these parts that seem to be limiting now, help them transition into allies to support you. It turns out that if you look back, it's been a perfect training program for you to do your purpose and for you to navigate life.
Yeah. The other thing I would add is that awareness is a prerequisite, but it's not sufficient by itself. So the first part of the program is about developing awareness of the wounding event or pattern, when it happened, how it happened, and what were all the different things that got set up in your psyche as a result of it. So that's the first stage of the process. So that develops a lot of awareness. And even if you've already done years of work on your wound, you'll learn something new about it during that process. So that's the first step. But awareness by itself does not equal transformation in my experience. So once we have the awareness, now we have enough information to transform the beliefs, to transform your relationship to the emotions, to transform the parts, right? To transform all the different components and features of the wound. And then there is a transformation of awareness that results from that, which is now it no longer feels like a wound anymore. It no longer feels like a problem to be solved, and you no longer feel like something broken in need of fixing. That's the result of the transformation of the wound, right? So it's not the same as healing, because we're not making it like the wound never happened. Because as Beth said, there's all sorts of gifts and abilities you get from the wound in reaction to it. And if you made it as if the wound had never been there, you would lose all those gifts and abilities, which are absolutely essential to you to live your life in general and get your needs met. And as Beth said, to go out and manifest your purpose. So we're not making the wound go away. We're making it not a wound anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That actually sort of leads into a question here. I believe it's pronounced Genevieve, so I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. The question is, will the parts that want to defend us want to change?
Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So there is a part of this process that we teach that's called permission, and this is, I think this is pretty unique, Tim, to the work that you've developed, and the courses that we teach together. They all have an aspect of permission, because this is a question about what needs to be true for you to feel safe and comfortable moving through the process, right? So what we find in the way that we do this is, if something were really not safe, if a part were really doing a job and it wasn't safe for it to change, you probably would not get permission to change that part in that way. There are other things you might do, or there are some things that you might do in order to open permission to do it. What would you add to that, Tim?
Yeah, so sometimes the parts, as Beth said, sometimes the parts, if you ask them, they're miserable. Like, they go, oh my God, I've been doing this job for 50 years. Please help me. Can I do something else? Can I trade in this job for something else? That's less usual. More commonly, the part is just chugging along, doing it when it's been doing, and reasonably satisfied in its job. So if you just dial up your inner critic and say, hey, inner critic, what do you say about not criticizing me anymore? the inner critic is going to, I don't want to like launch a bunch of swear words here, but the inner critic will take a dim view of that suggestion, right? So if you're trying to enroll the part in changing, probably not going to get anywhere except in very rare cases. So we have this interesting little kind of Aikido trick that we do. So as many of you know, the work that we do is fundamentally purpose-based. This is not a purpose program. This is a program for people who want their wounds out of their way so they can go manifest their purpose. Now, you don't have to manifest your purpose. That's why we're doing it, right? You might want your wound out of your way for some completely other reason because you're on your third marriage and you don't want to lose this one. There could be other reasons why you want your wound out of your way. But for us, as change agents, we want you to have your wound out of your way so you can manifest your purpose. Well, one of the tricks we learned, and this was something that Jeffrey Van Dyke developed, a very clever trick, is that if you're talking to a part that doesn't want to transform, there's a very particular technique you can use to find the higher purpose of the part and then show it that the way it's doing its job is not consistent with its purpose. So I'm not saying I want you to change. That's not enrolling or influencing the part at all. But if I can show the part that its behavior is not consistent with its own purpose, now the part suddenly becomes receptive and starts going, yeah, you got a point there. I wonder if there might be another way for me to operate that's more consistent with that purpose. I'm curious about that. I'm willing to hear more. Usually they're not all like gung-ho, yeah, let's change. Happens sometimes. Usually they're more sort of cautiously receptive. And if you can help the part develop a new job description that's more aligned with its purpose than the old job description, then it will get on board and do a complete 180-degree transformation from what it was doing before. It's remarkable how the new version of the part is completely dissimilar from the old version, like unrecognizable, like the inner critic becomes your passion coach or something like that, right? It's just like, really? How do we get there from here, you know? So they'll do a complete transformation and be very enthusiastic and gung-ho about a totally new role that no longer is causing you pain and suffering and is now helping you manifest your purpose instead of hindering it. But this is something, I mean, this takes us a couple weeks to show you how to do this. This is a rather involved process, and you have to approach the part in a very specific way, or else the part will absolutely hear nothing of it. So yes, no, often the parts don't want to transform initially, but that doesn't mean you can't transform them. You just have to know how.
Yeah, and there is also something about having a dialogue, having a conversation with a part of you that never gets a chance to talk, to express itself. You know, that actually helps that part become self-aware. So that's pretty amazing too. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You sort of touched on this already, but let's go to a specific question here from Shilpa, who wants to know, what if you don't recall your childhood before age 13?
I'd be looking for a wound at age 13, for starters. But we did already address this, which is that if the wound is completely unconscious, we have ways of talking to unconscious parts that remember it. And they can tell you about it. And there's several steps involved in that process. First, you have to get permission from other parts to talk to the part that does know. And then when you talk to the part that does know, you have to deal with it in a very careful fashion, because often those parts are hurt and very sensitive and haven't been talked to ever. And so it may not be ready to answer technical questions on day one, right? So you have to deal with it in a very specific way. But there, for sure, even if you have no recollection of anything before age 13, there's a part of you that does. And one of those parts knows exactly what the wound was and when it occurred.
Yeah. And I would say that I was very unconscious of even having a wound when I started this work. And for me, it happened in layers. You know, so working at one layer allowed me to work at the next layer and then the next layer.
Okay, thank you for going a little deeper into that question. Let's see. First of all, if you're just joining us, we're here with Tim Kelley and Beth Scanzani, learning about their upcoming course, Evolving Beyond Your Wounds, which begins Thursday, November 1st. And you can log on to beyondyourwounds.com for all the details and to register. So let's get back into the questions here. We have one from, I believe this is pronounced Aisha. And the question is, what can be done to break through the mental and physical self-sabotage that keeps us from acting on our wants, needs, and desires, specifically when it already has one believing that they're either just lazy or, at my age, what's the point? I've struggled with this since I can remember.
Yeah, Tim, why don't you go with this one first and I'll follow. Yeah.
Great. So first of all, this is all tied together and all kind of leads back to the same place, like all roads lead to Rome. So the idea here is that there's a part of you telling you that you're lazy, probably an inner critic, could be some other part like a driver or a pusher, but likely an inner critic. And there's another part telling you it's too late. You should have had it figured out by now. No reason to go on. You've already failed, right? And I don't know which part that would be, but that's what it sounds like is going on in your psyche. Right? So these are now two very potent drags in the system. And we all have these drags. So the parts that were created that were meant to prevent further wounding aren't necessarily done in a sort of streamlined, efficient way that's designed to help you manifest your purpose. That's not what happens. It's safety first for these parts, right? And if that means that you can never have a satisfying relationship as long as you live, and you don't have to re-experience your wound, that's okay. If it means that you can never achieve anything significant in life, but you won't have to feel your wound again, that's okay. If it means that you'll never manifest your purpose in life, but you won't have to feel this feeling again, that's okay with the part. They're very clear on their priorities, right? And preventing further wounding or re-experiencing the original wound, that is job 1. And everything else, including your purpose in life, is job 10. Now, what's a little tricky about this is you're saying, wait a minute, these parts are preventing me from meeting my needs. Yes and no. These parts are actually helping you meet needs, just not the needs that you want to meet, right? There are very specific needs that they've been charged with making sure happen. Safety-related needs, emotional needs, making sure that certain things never happen. Those are needs, right? There are other needs that you're also trying to meet. And if they deem that meeting those needs puts the need that they're meeting at risks, forget it. They're not going to let you do the thing that you want to do. So this is one of those reasons why transforming parts is so important, because this part is squarely in your way. It's preventing you from having what you want. And if you call it up and ask it really nicely, would you please, stop doing this? It'll tell you to go yourself, right? It's not going to play ball just because you want it to do something different. That's why these techniques are so powerful, is because if you had the ability, it's like a magic wand. If you had the ability to go in there and take any part, the part that is blocking you from doing anything that you want, the part that's preventing you from making your dreams come true and living your purpose, and the part that if you had a part gun, you would shoot it without a second thought, right? And just be like so happy that it were dead. What if you had a magic wand and you could turn that part into a staunch ally and supporter that could put all the same power and energy that it's been using to block you into helping you manifest your purpose and helping you move towards what you want? That's exactly what happens. So shooting the part's a terrible idea because now you're losing a potential ally. But if you can turn this blocking part, as Beth said at the beginning, into an ally, now you have more allies, right? So this is the way Beth and I look at it when we're going into our own psyche or our clients. Any part we encounter, however horrifying it seems, is just another potential ally waiting to be retasked. And that could be true in your psyche as well. So we don't need to get rid of anything. All of that is tools that are put there to help you manifest your purpose. They're just not being used properly yet.
Yeah. It's reminding me of one of the parts transformations that happened to me some years ago, where I was always clearing the path for other people, absolutely determined, machete in hand, clearing the way for everybody else. It was exhausting. And when I worked with this part and we agreed on a parts transformation, this part, I could actually, it's almost as if I could see it move in front of me. And so this part now clears the path for me. And it just feels so nice to have a part of me clearing the path for me instead of having all my energy always being in service to everyone else, but not me.
Okay. Wow. This conversation is so fascinating. The questions just keep rolling in. We've actually got a comment and a question here from Arletta, who says, first, some people don't seem to have core wounds, and maybe you can comment on that. But her question is, can you explain again the part of the relation between purpose and core wounds?
Yeah, one of the things that I would say about that is that, and I think I said this a little bit earlier, it turns out that what happens in the psyche around core wounds turns out to be a perfect training program for your purpose. It also turns out that the nature of my wounding, the patterns that it created, the feelings that it created, the things that I want to move away from, the things that I really long to have and move toward, is also related to the wounding. So it gives clues to what purpose is, and it also provides training for me to go out into the world and manifest my purpose and speak to the people who need and want whatever it is, whatever change and transformation I have to offer, in a way that really resonates with them. Yeah, so it's a perfect training program. As we've also been talking about, the wound-driven energy is job one, and we need to deal with that in order to fully express purpose.
Yeah, I would say that the wound provides a psychological sort of fear-based incentive for doing your purpose, but it's completely unconscious. So the things Beth is saying is absolutely true. It's so consistent that the wound trains you for your purpose that we actually use that as a method for validating purpose in other programs where we're looking for purpose, right? If the person knows what their wound is and we help them find their purpose, we can say, okay, can you see how this wound was training for this purpose? If the purpose is accurate, the person will go, oh my God, that's so freaky. It always looked to me like this random event. Now it looks like this carefully designed training plan specifically for this purpose. How can that be? This can't be an accident. This is people's experience, but you have to have a very detailed understanding of your purpose and a very detailed understanding of your wound to be able to see that connection. And many people don't have one or both of those two things. Back to the original question. Oh, the other thing that Beth mentioned earlier, I want to repeat, is that in adulthood, when you're actually ready to go out and manifest your purpose, even though your wound has trained you for it, now it creates a huge obstacle to actually doing it. And this is the thing we talked about in the call a week or two ago. We talked about your wound expiring. That's what happened, right? Training. Okay, training done. And now the wound is sitting there like a boulder in the path that you can't get around. It's like, okay, now it's time to deal with this wound because training over, thank you. And how do I get this thing out of my way so I can go manifest my purpose and do the stuff I want to do, right? So it's both a setup for it, a training for it, a motivation for doing it, and an obstacle to it all at the same time. The first part of your question was some people don't seem to have wounds. And that could be from one of two things, right? One is they don't seem to have a wound because the wound is unconscious. They don't remember it. That's one possibility. The other is they don't seem to have a wound because they don't have a wound, right? This is just a model. This is a Jungian psychological model of childhood psychological development that says the way the psyche develops is in reaction to this thing that we're calling a wound. The Sufis, by the way, believe the same thing, right? This arcane sect of Islam. So, but that's a model, and models don't apply 100% of the time generally. The issue with not being wounded is that the wound is such a potent source of motivation that if you don't have any wound at all, it can actually be very difficult to be motivated to do anything, right? The way the psyche generally, most of the time, evolves: wound, reaction to the wound, motivation to avoid further wounding. And that motivation carries you into midlife, right? And when that motivation abandons you, we call that a midlife crisis, right? That train that carried you that far now suddenly stalls and stops going. Now you're like, right? So that's how it works. But if you don't get the wound, you also don't get the training and you don't get the motivation. And now you might wind up struggling to develop sufficient motivation to do stuff with your life. And you see this now. Certainly there are very wealthy people who've lived privileged lives who are deeply wounded. I work with, heads of family companies and private family, offices and stuff like that. These people are extremely wealthy, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars in some cases. And boy, are their kids screwed up? So there's no shortage of wounding in that environment. But sometimes what happens is the person was parented really well and everything was just fine and their needs were all taken care of, and they really didn't get wounded that much. And then you see this difficulty with motivation. Like you look at someone like Oprah, who's really gone out and changed the world in a major way. Listen to her sometime talk about her childhood experience of like getting dumped on her grandmother's porch and her grandmother refusing to let her in the house for, days, weeks, refusing to acknowledge her existence as she's sitting on her grandmother's porch. She can't even come into the house. Her grandmother won't even look at her or address her by name. I'm thinking, oh my God, what kind of wound is that? I mean, that's a big wound. And big wound, a lot of power, a lot of motivation, a lot of purpose. Look what she's done with it. And that's true of a lot of really famous, powerful people. And early in my career of getting trained as a teacher of consciousness work, I realized that my teachers were much more wounded than I was. And I started to worry that I wasn't wounded enough to be able to pull it off. Fortunately, it turns out I was. But so it is possible not really to have much substantial wounding, but that's not necessarily a good thing.
Okay, well, thank goodness for your wounding, Tim. Well, looking at the clock here, we have time for a few more questions. But before we take those, I want to give a few details about the course. Again, it's called Evolving Beyond Your Wounds. And this is going to be a really powerful 20-week journey under Tim and Beth's expert guidance, along with other instructors, Jeffrey Van Dyke for one, and then others, Lion Goodman, et cetera. And so what you'll do is you'll liberate yourself from your deepest wounds and the ways that they've constrained your freedom and success. And the 20-week course takes place on Thursdays at noon Pacific, starting Thursday, November 1st. And if you can't join us live, that's fine. You won't miss the teachings. You'll receive audio and video recordings, transcripts, and all course handouts on your course homepage. Also, I'd like to remind you that we offer a no-risk money-back guarantee on all of our courses, giving you a full 2 weeks until November 15th in this case to make sure that you absolutely love it. And as an added option, all participants are welcome to connect in a private Facebook community group so you can stay connected with one another. Also, everyone who registers receives the Evolving Beyond Your Wounds bonus collection. First, you'll get access to a live call with Tim Kelley called Creating Automated Transformation. Next, you'll receive an audio teaching and PDF guide from Jeffrey Van Dyke entitled Somatic Presencing. Then you'll be able to access another live call, this time with both Tim and Beth, called Reformatting the Ego. And when you register by midnight Pacific on Thursday, October 25th, you'll receive this additional bonus gift, and that is one more live call with Tim Kelley and Beth Scanzani. This one is called Dealing with Shadow Parts. So before we get back into questions, Beth and Tim, what are you each looking forward to sharing in this upcoming course? Let's start with Beth.
Yeah, well, I do want to also mention, Lisa, that we have a fabulous staff of coaches in this program. So there is also opportunity for people to connect with coaches in the mastermind groups and also in what we call after parties, some time after class. And they also participate in helping people on the Facebook, in the Facebook group. So I think that's a really important benefit to this program. I think one of the things that I am most looking forward to is I'm most looking forward to having people be more comfortable, joyful, expressing all of who they are, because we lose parts of ourselves in this wounding process that emotions and feelings and aspects of ourselves that go into the unconscious with the wounding. And this process helps to bring those aspects of ourselves back. And so I find that one of the things in these programs is that people just feel so much better about who they are and how they show up in the world and how they react to what's happening in relationship and in the world. it's a much more joyful, peaceful, aligned kind of a life that people tend to experience once they've done this wounding work.
I'd add also how they don't react, Beth, right? So
don't react, yes.
One of the symptoms of doing a good job of transforming the core wound is suddenly stuff that used to drive you crazy and set you off and trigger you before just doesn't anymore. You know, maybe you've got like an ex-spouse or something like that who drives you completely crazy, and you transform your core wound and suddenly you don't mind him so much anymore. You know, he's still kind of a jerk, but it's just not such a big deal, right? So people get really extraordinary effects like that from doing this work. To answer your question, Lisa, about what am I looking forward to? That I really, my brain really keyed in on that reformatting the ego bonus call we had, which is really the setup for a whole teaching that we do after this course, which is how to completely restructure your psyche and tune it to the optimum configuration for manifesting your purpose and changing the world and meeting your needs and fulfilling your goals and dreams, right? But the reason why we do it at the end is because until you've transformed the core wound, this is not really an option. This is why people can struggle in therapy for decades and decades and decades, trying to get some of these core patterns of behavior to shift a tiny bit, because they're all being driven by this underlying unconscious wound. And so if you transform the wound, suddenly those transformations become simple and easy and can take hours instead of decades. And now you have the option to say, okay, well, this is the psyche as it was given to me. You know, it's kind of like the computer out of the box. It's like, okay, but let me change some options around here, install some different software, move some stuff around. I don't like the background color. I'm going to change that, right? So like, you know, renovating your house, right? So the psyche you live in, you can renovate it, but you have to transform the core wound first. After the core wound has been transformed, suddenly all bets are off. Suddenly you can restructure the whole thing. And that we'll begin that process at the very end of this program. There's a whole other teaching that we do about how to do that. And so for change agents and messengers who are really wanting to change the world, this is like having a Ferrari psyche to do that with. It's just awesome. So that's what I'm looking forward to. So it's in this program and after.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
that sounds fantastic. Go ahead, Beth.
Yeah. I was just going to say, you know, I designed an automatic transmission with a manual overdrive, so a manual option. You know, so I can kick it into manual gear if I want, but it goes pretty much on automatic.
Perfect. Well, let's get back to questions here. We've got one from Leslie who says, how can you deal with families' attitudes and disrespect when you have already been through your awareness and you know you did nothing wrong? Or if a narcissistic mother has literally sabotaged your life?
Shall I do that one, Beth?
Yeah, go right ahead.
It's fascinating because the family of origin material is usually where the wound comes from. Not necessarily, like you could have been raped by a stranger or something like that, but often the wound is very well integrated with your core family of origin dynamics, right? And in those family of origin dynamics, you have a role to play, and your parts know what that role is, and they're going to make sure that you play it. So this is why it's so hard. It takes so much energy to shift your role in your family of origin dynamic, right? Because your psyche's designed to keep doing the thing that you've been doing all along for your own sake and for the sake of the family system. No matter how sure you are it's a bad idea, that's what your psyche is designed to do, right? So the attitudes of these people and their beliefs about you and their perception of your role in the family system and your role in the world is absolutely triggered and wound up in this wounded material. So like we're talking before about, you know, transforming your psyche, right? So you transform the core wound, and now suddenly playing that role in the family or reacting the way you've always reacted to your mother become options instead of being mandatory. And it's really interesting. Usually one of two things happen. One thing that happens is you change, you transform, and the people in your family don't like that, and they don't want you to do that, and they object. But it's too late. Now you're free. Now you're not constrained by their desire to have you keep playing your role anymore. And you're able to gracefully move, or sometimes moderately gracefully move, into a different position in yourself, and therefore a different position in the family system. And whether they like it or not, when you're in that state, there's really not much they can do about it, right? So that's one thing that happens. The other thing that happens more often than you'd think is you transform your wound, and suddenly your family starts treating you differently. I have seen this happen over and over again. It looks like black magic, because you're like going back to Christmas or Thanksgiving or some family holiday or something like that. And you're thinking, uh-oh, here we go again. And you show up, and suddenly everyone's acting completely differently towards you, right? Maybe there was one woman I was working with in Israel. She was like, oh my God, this is so hard to deal with my family. We did all this transformation work. She showed up with them. She goes, they were totally different. They were supportive. They were friendly. They were asking me how they could help. I've never seen them act like that in my entire life. And my response was, told you. Right? And now, it doesn't always happen, but it happens a lot. And the deal is that you can transform an entire relationship by transforming yourself. What most people are doing is waiting for the other person to change their behavior so that they'll have a different experience. That's not how it works. And it's not just about changing your behavior. You have to change who you're being in the relationship. And in order to do that, if it's a family of origin relationship, that means you have to transform your core wound. So you transform your core wound. Now you show up as a different human being in the relationship. Now the relationship's totally different, and the other person starts to treat you differently. And you never said a word to them. You never asked them to do it. You never told them to do it. You never told them that you transformed. It just happens like magic. And it spooks people because it's so unexpected when it happens. And it happens thoroughly, and it happens permanently. Not all the time, but a lot.
Yeah, and another aspect of that is shifting the core belief. So there may be a shift in a core belief that also changes the way you see the other people, the way you see yourself, the other people, and the situation. I can remember one of my teachers saying to me, I had a lot of, they were either very needy people who I drew into my life, or people who didn't give a darn about anybody else's needs but their own. And it was really difficult. And this person told me, Beth, this will not change until you get in touch with your own needs, until you have a different relationship with your own needs. And that's part of my core wounding. So when I was able to do enough work on myself to shift my wounds, people disappeared from my life. They didn't keep showing up like that anymore. I didn't pull people like that in. And the people who were in my life at the time, who were causing me at the time so much triggering and pain, they disappeared. So.
Yeah, the back to the thing about your mother having destroyed your life. It's going to be obvious to you what she's done to create these outcomes for yourself. What's going to be less clear, usually, what's less conscious, usually, is how you've participated in that and how you've enabled that and how you've given her permission to do that. And when you transform the wound, the stuff that you've been doing, much of it probably unconscious, that keeps that dynamic alive will shift. And now she won't be able to do that anymore. Why? Because you're no longer playing your part in that play.
Yeah.
Well, that's
and it's
good
very
news.
hard for people to imagine. And it's so easy to see from the other side, and from this side, it looks impossible. I'm like, well, it happened.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go to a question from Kate, just asking for a little bit of clarification on the same topic. Kate says, so say my pattern is I do what others want me to do so as to please them and not disappoint them. And I try to break that pattern and feel horrible guilt and anxiety. I can move beyond this pattern?
Many have. I would say many people have. Absolutely.
The short answer is yes.
Yes. Yeah. There's a strategy there, a strategy to keep you safe. And when you understand it better, when you work with the beliefs and the parts and the transformation and get permission to do all of that, absolutely, that can change.
And part of what she's sharing is something you can see is this assumption that the new way of doing things is the opposite of the old way. And that's actually not true, right? So I was being helpful to everybody, so now I'm going to stop doing that and take care of my own needs. Well, actually, neither one of those is a useful, sustainable pattern by itself. And so it's not that you'll never want to help other people, but what's the motive? What's driving your need to help them? Because at some level, it's not really a choice, right? You have to struggle and struggle and struggle to get yourself to stop. And then you feel horrible because your whole strategy for engaging in life, your self-esteem, is tied to that pattern of helping other people, right? And for you listening, it may not be helping other people. It could be being invisible. It could be taking up all the space. It could be being right. There's all sorts of things people do in their wound-driven patterns. But in her case, it's helping other people. So it's not that we want you to stop helping other people. We want helping other people to be optional, and we want it to be motivated for some other reason than because you have to prove your worth as a human being, or whatever the underlying belief is that came from the womb, right? So there's some unconscious motivation forcing you to be helpful. You force yourself to stop. Now you feel horrible about yourself. Then you stop. Then you start helping again in a wound-driven way. Now you feel horrible about that, right? There's no winning from that place. You have to go down and transform the wound, and now you can help or not help. And the reasons for helping, if you choose to help, would be different than they were when you were doing it in a wound-driven way.
Yeah, and I really want to reinforce the choice piece, having an option. I can be self-sufficient, I can be needy, I can be helpful, I can say no, right? So I have more choice, more range of options.
All right. Wow. Well, looking at the clock, we're about out of time here. This has just been a fascinating hour. I want to thank our viewers for being with us today and for all of your questions. You guys are the ones who make these conversations, so thank you for that. Evolving Beyond Your Wounds starts Thursday, November 1st. And again, you can visit beyondyourwounds.com to learn more and to register. So before we cut you loose, Tim and Beth, any final words?
I'll go first. I'll just say this course isn't for everyone, right? So you would have to have an impulse, a desire, an urge to transform your wound. It could be for its own sake, like, oh, I want to get in there and transform that wound. Or it could be because of what it's stopping you from doing, right? Maybe you're done with this pattern with your mother or with your ex-husband, or maybe you're done watching yourself sabotage yourself as you try to manifest your purpose or achieve your dreams. And it's just like, you know what, I can't do that anymore. And what I've tried to do so far has helped, but it's like this much effort and this much result is what most people feel. It's like it just took me massive amounts of effort and decades of work to get some shift in the patterns. I don't have that kind of time. I don't have that kind of energy. I need it to transform now. And that's not true for everybody. For some of you, like you're coming and listening to this call and you're like, well, this is cool. This is interesting. Thank you. This was useful information, right? That's okay. We're looking for the ones who are like, you can feel it. It's an itch. It's a drive. You can hear the voice in the back of your head telling you that you have to do this, that it's important, that it can't wait, right? That's how you know that this is something you need to do.
Yeah, and I'm getting that image that I love, and I know you talk about this sometimes, Tim, of the pearl and the oyster. It's that sand, that sand, that's that gritty sand that creates the pearl. And so, I'm imagining what happens in this course, because it does, is that this what felt like sand in the beginning feels like a pearl at the end. So if you're ready, right? If this sandy feeling has gotten just too much and you want to transform it into a pearl and you're ready, we have a lot of support. We have the techniques, we have the processes, we have the coaches, there's the Facebook page. There's a lot of support in this course. People buddy up with each other and remain often in buddy relationships for years to come. So you won't be doing this unless you choose to by yourself in a vacuum. There's lots of support.
All right, beautiful. Thank you again, Tim Kelley and Beth Scanzani. It's been a pleasure to speak with you both today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. Yeah.
You bet. And once again, thank you to everyone who joined us today. On behalf of all of us at the Shift Network, I wish you well and look forward to having you on this course or perhaps another one in the future. Have a great day, everyone.